I am the oldest sibling in my family, and I have a younger sister named Kiki. Being the older one, I am the one who has financially supported my family for years after my dad's passing. For context, 4 years ago, Dad passed away in a hit-and-run accident. When the ambulance finally arrived, it was already too late for him, and he was declared dead at the scene. To make things worse, the person responsible for killing him was never caught, leaving us all with both a profound sense of grief and a frustration that justice was never served. Since Dad was the only earning member of the family at the time, after his loss, we struggled to keep things afloat. At the time of Dad's death, I was just on the cusp of graduating from college, so I quickly started looking for jobs. Thankfully, I was able to secure a stable job right after graduation. My mom, having never worked outside the home before, struggled immensely to find a job, especially while grieving, so I assured her that I would take care of things. Although I was dealing with my own grief, I knew I had to quickly shift my focus to supporting my family. So, this is how all the responsibilities of the house fell on my shoulder from a very young age. At first, my salary was more than enough to support myself, my mom, and my sister. But as their expenses grew over time, I began to realize that covering household costs, supporting Kiki, and helping my mom would take more than just a regular 9-to-5 job. So, I've even worked overtime at my workplace, as well taken up additional part-time jobs, just to earn a bit more to ease our family's financial strain. There is not a single day that I have rested properly or taken a leave from work, as I cannot afford to do that. As a result, there have been days when I've felt utterly exhausted, but the thought of my family depending on me keeps me going. It's been challenging, and at times I wonder how long I can keep up this pace. But knowing that I'm providing for my family in the absence of my father became both a motivation and a duty over time. However, my youngest sister is my complete opposite, and does nothing to contribute around the house. Kiki is a spiritual teacher, a career that, while meaningful in its own way, doesn't bring any substantial income or financial relief for our family. I want to make it clear that I respect her passion and her commitment to what she does, but the reality is that her work isn't enough to contribute to our financial needs. She doesn't have many clients, and the ones she does have pay her very little. I have tried to talk to her about it to change her career path, but she claims that being a spiritual teacher is her calling. Meanwhile, she continues to demand me for any money that she needs. This difference in perspectives and responsibilities has led to frequent arguments between us. I didn't mind helping out my sister when she was young, but now that she is older and an adult, I needed her to step up and at least use whatever money I was giving her for a better purpose. For example, Kiki insists on buying only high-end organic foods, choosing to shop exclusively at an expensive organic store where prices are nearly double what they would be at a regular grocery store. And while I believe in healthy living, I don't think it's reasonable for her to make these choices at my expense, especially when she could choose more affordable options that wouldn't hurt my wallet as much. In addition to this, Kiki is also adamant about going for regular beauty treatments, getting manicures almost every other week, for instance. She'll even demand that I send her $300 for these services or more, sometimes including hair treatments as well. Whenever I try to put my foot down and say I can't keep funding her lifestyle, Kiki argues that as her older sister, I should help her out as much as I can instead of trying to control her. If I continue to not give her any money, she would then take her anger out on Mom. She will yell and complain to Mom about me, and sometimes even steal whatever money I give Mom from her purse. This then puts Mom in a difficult position, often leaving her without enough funds to buy whatever she requires. Mom then has to come to me to ask for more money. Ultimately, everyone's burden falls on my shoulder. Our mom, who sees the situation from both sides, has tried to talk to Kiki on numerous occasions. She has gently suggested to Kiki to find a steady job or at least make some effort to contribute financially, even part-time if she wants to continue her spiritual practice. But despite these conversations, Kiki hasn't shown any willingness to change or adjust her approach. Her insistence on living a lifestyle that doesn't align with our family's reality has only made the strain in our family more pronounced, leaving me carrying this burden largely on my own. Now, coming to the recent incident and why I am on Reddit today, Kiki had been dating this guy who, from what I could tell, was never the most reliable or trustworthy person. He basically liked stringing my sister along, but never really publicly accepted her as his girlfriend. He also regularly hung out with a lot of other females behind Kiki's back. Eventually, my sister caught him red-handed with one of his so-called friends. When she confronted him, he argued that he had done nothing wrong and refused to apologize. As a result, their argument became intense, and before long, things got physical. Kiki, feeling deeply hurt and betrayed, ended up punching him in the face and even threw several of his items around the room. She threatened to harm him further and any other girl he was involved with. Things spiraled out of control to the point that the neighbors heard the commotion and called the police. When the officers arrived, they saw that Kiki had been the one who'd lashed out physically, and because of the damage she'd caused and her physical assault on him, she was arrested. Luckily, the guy agreed to not press any charges, and since this was her first offense, the officers agreed to let her go with warning. I thought that going through something so dramatic might at least lead her to reflect on her actions and maybe change for the better. However, rather than expressing any remorse or acknowledging the trouble she'd put everyone through, Kiki remained entirely unapologetic. In fact, she was adamant that she'd done the right thing. She openly declared that she had no regrets about how she'd handled the situation, seeing her actions as justified under the circumstances. Ever since her breakup, Kiki has done little but sulk around the house, using the breakup as an excuse to avoid any sort of responsibility. Rather than stepping up or trying to move forward, she has slipped deeper into a reckless lifestyle. Most days, she goes out with her friends to various pubs, coming back late at night completely drunk, and, more often than not, she brings strangers home with her. I've tried speaking with her, hoping that a conversation might help her see the harm she's doing to herself and the chaos she's bringing into our lives. But she simply doesn't listen, brushing off my concerns as if I'm the one overreacting. This week, my mom pulled me aside to talk about Kiki. My sister was out at the time, so Mom and I could talk freely about her. Mom started to tell me how she was starting to get genuinely concerned about Kiki, sharing that she'd recently discovered Kiki has been using drugs. This was a surprise since I thought my sister only ever got drunk or smoked weed, because knowing that she had now started to use drugs was scary. It also made sense why my sister had been asking me for more and more money every week. Mom continued to express that Kiki's self-destructive behavior might spiral even further out of control and felt that we needed to step up and intervene before things got any worse for her. I agreed and suggested that maybe it was time to get Kiki some professional help. Perhaps we could look into rehab, a counselor, or even therapy, someone who might be able to reach her in ways we clearly haven't been able to. After all, no amount of talking seems to be making any difference, and every attempt we've made to reach her so far has ended up in arguments or dismissive responses. However, my mom argued that she didn't want her daughter's care to be left up to the hands of a stranger. She felt strongly that, as her family, it was our responsibility to support Kiki in whatever way we could. She then surprised me by mentioning that after she found out about my sister's drug use, she had been researching on her own and had found just the perfect, luxury wellness retreat where she thought she could take Kiki for a week. This retreat allowed each participant to bring a companion, and Mom felt it would give her an opportunity to spend quality time with Kiki in a therapeutic setting. I was taken aback by the idea, not just because it seemed unnecessary, but also because I couldn't fathom how we could afford it. With my income, after covering all our bills and family expenses, there's rarely any extra left over, and going to a luxury retreat was out of the question. We couldn't even splurge on a meal at a modest restaurant, so the thought of paying for a week at a high-end wellness retreat seemed wildly unrealistic. When I questioned how we could possibly fund this, Mom gently reminded me that she knew I'd been saving up to buy a used car for months. She then suggested that perhaps I could use that money instead to send her and Kiki to the retreat. I felt a mix of shock and frustration. I'd been diligently setting aside money for this car because it was essential for my daily routine. My commute currently stretches to nearly 3 hours each way, and having a car would drastically reduce that. Buying a car was something I needed to help manage my time better and reduce the exhaustion that comes with my long commute. Besides, this wasn't just about me. Having a car would benefit all of us, allowing us to cut down on the costs and inconveniences of public transport, Uber, and other options we rely on. I explained this to my mom, pointing out that this car was an investment in our future stability and would ultimately help our family as well. So, I told her that I wasn't going to give up my hard-earned savings for my sister. But Mom was adamant, saying that Kiki needed this experience more than I needed the car and that we couldn't stand by and do nothing for her. She expressed her deep fear of losing another loved one, especially after Dad's passing, and was convinced that a retreat could be transformative for Kiki. I pointed out to my mom that a more reasonable alternative would be to find a counselor or therapist locally, one who could work with Kiki regularly to address her emotional and mental health. That way, we wouldn't have to spend such a significant amount on a retreat where Kiki might end up simply relaxing rather than tackling the issues she needs to address. I assured Mom that I would research options and find a reputable counselor for Kiki by the end of the week. I suggested to Mom that all she needed to do was have a heart-to-heart conversation with Kiki and just encourage my sister to give counseling a try, as Kiki often disregards my suggestions. My mom didn't argue much with me after that, so I thought she had finally come around to see my point of view. So, you can imagine my utter shock and anger when I came home last night, exhausted from work, only to find the house eerily empty. Usually, when I walk in, Mom is either watching TV or reading one of her books. I called out for both Kiki and Mom, hoping they'd pop up from somewhere, but the house was empty. No response, no sign of anyone. I thought maybe they were out buying groceries or something. I walked into the kitchen and noticed a note taped to the refrigerator, written in my mom's familiar handwriting. I pulled it off the fridge and read the message from her. Sorry we couldn't wait for you. Kiki and I are on our way to the luxury retreat. I know you'll be upset, but honestly, money can always be earned back, but your sister's mental health comes first. We'll see you in a week. I stood there, staring at the note, unable to fully process what I was reading. Overwhelmed with anxiety and disbelief, I ran to my computer and logged into my bank account. Mom had access to my bank account, and as I looked at my balance, a feeling of shock washed over me. Mom had withdrawn all the savings I had. Every dollar I had carefully put aside for months was completely drained. The fact that my own mother could do something so vile to me, left me feeling both betrayed and helpless. I couldn't hold back the tears. I just sat there, staring at the screen, sobbing in disbelief and frustration. How could she take the money I had worked so hard to save, money that was supposed to help me make my life easier, and use it to fund a luxury retreat with my ungrateful sister? All I could see was that simple note on the fridge, saying, money can always be earned back. How could she say that, though, when I was the only one actually earning anything around the house? Mom didn't work, Kiki didn't contribute, I was the one sacrificing my time, my energy, and my future, all to keep us afloat. And now, after everything, they'd taken my hard-earned money for a getaway I never agreed to, leaving me to bear the full weight of responsibility. Since then, I've left Mom several angry voicemails, trying to make her understand just how deeply she hurt me. But she hasn't answered a single call, choosing instead to ignore my attempts to reach her. She knows I'm upset and yet has decided to avoid confronting the situation. As for Kiki, the only response I've gotten from her was a single, infuriating text, a wink emoji. A wink. No apology, no explanation, just a smug little emoji, as if to say she couldn't care less about the pain I feel. This whole situation has left me feeling betrayed, unsupported, and utterly alone in a family I've done nothing but sacrifice for. I am so angry. Reddit. Ida, for being pissed at my mom and sister for doing this to me? Am I overreacting? Update 1. Thank you to everyone for your comments. It has really made me think. I completely agree, my mom and sister have been taking advantage of my willingness to step up. Please let me explain. When Dad passed away, I was devastated. In that grief, I felt this immense responsibility to take care of our family. I was the only one who had a job, and somehow, I convinced myself that it was my duty to make sure we were okay financially, even if it meant taking on more than my fair share. It was almost as if I believed that providing for them would somehow fill the void that Dad's absence left. At the time, I was so focused on keeping us all afloat that I didn't notice how little effort they were putting in to support me, or themselves. But now, after everything that's happened, it's become painfully clear that things have gone way too far. Losing my savings like this has been a real wake-up call, and it's made me realize that I have been taken for granted. Mom and Kiki seem to assume I'll always be there to pick up the pieces, but what about my own life? I'm working myself to the bone, while they continue to live without contributing financially or even showing gratitude for my sacrifices. To everyone telling me to report my mom to the police, I don't want to do that. As much as I am angry and disappointed in her, I don't want her to end up in jail. Instead, I've decided to give her an even harsher consequence by moving out of the house. I could have done this years ago, but I stayed with Mom and Kiki all these years because I felt they needed me. If I weren't shouldering the burden of their expenses, I could actually have a stable, financially secure life. I could use my money to live comfortably, maybe even invest in things I enjoy or build a future for myself. It's hard to admit, but I'm starting to realize that my loyalty to my family has cost me my own happiness. I have a lot to think about for tonight. Update 2. It's been a week since my last update. Thanks to all of your strong suggestions and support. The first thing I did was begin packing up my things from around the house. I made a point of gathering everything I had bought over the years: kitchen appliances, dishes, home decor, and the countless other items that I had purchased to make our home functional and comfortable. I then reached out to a close friend, who graciously offered to let me stay with her temporarily while I searched for an apartment of my own. I made sure to leave long before Mom and Kiki returned, leaving not a single note or explanation behind. I knew any conversation about my departure would fall on deaf ears, and I wanted them to truly feel the weight of my absence without any warning. Sure enough, the moment they arrived back and found the house stripped of everything I'd ever contributed, they began calling me repeatedly. My phone was soon flooded with voicemails from Mom, asking where I was and what had happened to all the things in the house. The irony was almost laughable. Only now, when they were faced with an empty house and no one to rely on, did they start reaching out in desperation. Now, they were the ones left without answers. After letting them stew for a few hours, I called Mom back. When she picked up, she told me that she had me on speakerphone, and Kiki was next to her. Both of them wanted to know why I had disappeared. Mom told me she knew I was upset about her taking my money and tried to justify it by saying that Kiki was feeling much better after her mini vacation. She insisted that I shouldn't still be upset about it. I just kept my composure and informed Mom that I had moved out for good and now they were on their own. Immediately, Mom and Kiki demanded to know why I had done something like this. Mom started to say that I should have talked with her before leaving the house like that. I reminded her that she and Kiki had gone behind my back, taken every cent of my savings without so much as a heads up, and spent it on themselves, without even waiting for the chance to talk it over with me. They had ignored my calls all week, avoiding any attempt at accountability until now when they'd returned to find themselves without my financial support. I told them that I was done supporting them. They had made their choices, and now they could handle the consequences. If they truly wanted to be on their own, they were welcome to it. I wasn't coming back. That was when Mom began pleading, saying that I couldn't just leave them like this and that she was now willing to sit down and talk things over with me. But Kiki, still in the background, was shouting louder than ever, demanding to know why I was punishing them by starving them and leaving them behind when all they had done was just take a well-deserved break. She even accused me of being selfish. Mom argued that half the kitchen appliances were gone and that there was barely any food left in the house. She tried to guilt me, saying while she understood my frustration, she was frustrated with my overreaction. She said that I was throwing a tantrum for no reason and urged me to calm down and come back home. But for the first time, I felt no pull of guilt, no desire to smooth things over or run back to fix everything. Instead, I knew I was done and that realization felt freeing. This was no tantrum, it was me finally standing up for myself, setting boundaries that had been overlooked for far too long. When Mom suggested that if I returned, she would never make the same mistake again, I simply laughed at her. I told her, flat out, that I couldn't care less if she ever did something like this again. I had already taken steps to protect myself. I had removed her access to my bank account. I also wasn't going to send them any more money or bail them out. They were on their own now. I told her they still had the house Dad paid for, and if they really wanted to stay afloat, they needed to find jobs immediately and start taking responsibility. Kiki, of course, screamed and demanded to know what they were supposed to do in the meantime, how they were going to survive without food and no money. Mom, angry and desperate, started yelling at me too, calling me selfish and stubborn-headed. But I wasn't fazed. I'd heard all the guilt trips before. I simply ignored their screaming and ended the call, blocking both of them from contacting me again. I can't lie, it felt incredibly satisfying. After all those years of putting myself second and giving everything for them, I was finally standing up for myself. I know this will be a tough lesson for them, but they need to understand the consequences of exploiting me and taking advantage of my hard work. Since that conversation, there's been no contact from my family, mainly because I have blocked them from my contacts and social media also. For the first time in a long time, I'm living my life on my own terms, and it feels like a weight has been lifted. Update 3, for everyone who's worried about my mom or sister showing up at my job, don't worry. I've already informed my boss about the situation, and a few of my colleagues are aware of how crazy and irrational both my mom and sister are. It's safe to say that everyone has been very sympathetic and supportive about what I've been through. If Kiki does show up at my workplace to harass me, well, it would only give me a reason to file a police complaint against her. That definitely wouldn't be good for her record, so I sincerely hope for her sake that she doesn't cross that line. As for how my mom and Kiki are going to survive with no food or money, honestly, I don't know, and at this point, I really don't care. Perhaps there's still a bit of the money they took from me left, after all their spending on the retreat, or maybe they'll find a way to make do. They're adults, and they have a house, so it's not like they're completely without resources. Maybe they'll manage to find jobs soon or even reach out to other family members for help. At this point, I'm done being the one to pick up the pieces for them. I've spent years looking after them, sacrificing my own well-being. This is their turn to figure things out on their own. I've made my choice, and I'm moving forward with my life. Update 4. Wow, it's been 6 months since my last update. I continue to receive DMs from people asking how I'm doing, So I'm finally here on Reddit to give an update. My life has been going great lately. I've finally moved into my own place after saving money for months while living with my friend. It's not a big space, but it's mine, and that's all that matters right now. Now that I have a space of my own, I have started to save for a car, just like I'd always dreamt about. As for any updates regarding my mom and Kiki, they did try to reach out to me a few months ago. They showed up at my office one late evening. I'll admit, seeing them there shook me a little. My mom looked absolutely exhausted, her eyes were sunken, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. It was clear she had been going through a lot. She ran straight into my arms and started crying, pleading with me to come back home with them. I wanted to feel sympathy for her, but I stayed firm. I told her no, and I couldn't go back to that environment. Hearing this, my mom continued to cry, like she couldn't even fathom what I was saying. Kiki, of course, immediately started blaming me for abandoning them and told me how difficult their life has been, as if all of this was somehow my fault. She insisted that I needed to stop playing around and come back home since they had already learned their lesson. Kiki even claimed she was now ready to find a job and earn proper money just like I had wanted her to do. Mom then tried to pull the emotional card, saying Dad would be disappointed in me for abandoning them and that he would have wanted us to stick together. I replied calmly, but firmly, that I believed Dad would actually be proud of me for cutting my losses and walking away. I wasn't going to let them drag me down anymore. I told them how much better my life had become without them, without constantly being asked for money or to rescue them from their own choices. I continued to tell them it was wrong for them to just show up outside my office like this, without any respect for my boundaries. I had explicitly cut them off, so this was not okay. They couldn't force me to go back home with them when I didn't want to. I warned them that if they did something like this again, I would call the cops. I wasn't going to let them manipulate me back into a situation where I was being taken for granted. In the end, she and Mom left begrudgingly. But even while going, Kiki begged me to give her a few $100s for the last time, but I refused. That was the last time I saw them in person. After that encounter, there's been no further contact from them. Since then, I've heard through a few friends from my old neighborhood that Kiki still hasn't found a proper job, while Mom is the one working at a local diner and bringing in all the money. It breaks my heart honestly that my sister is so cruel to make our poor mother work for her. Also, Kiki has made her current boyfriend move in with them. Apparently this guy does have a job and isn't exactly like a freeloader, so I guess he's helping out with things. If he's providing support, at least they have some stability now. Anyway, this will be my final update about my family. I've put in a lot of effort to heal and move forward after leaving home, so I'm going to choose to not discuss about them any further.